Right, 19 minutes before the top of the hour, just to let you know that SABC2, this channel, will be broadcasting the Nelson Mandela lecture that will be delivered by Barack Obama. So that's something to look forward to, as well as Channel 404, so you can tune into both. But if you're not in front of a television, radio has got you covered. And I think almost all of the SABC radio stations will be bringing that lecture to you live from SAFM to Lesedi, Radio 2000, Metro FM, Channel Africa, Pala Pala, Motswedeng, you name it, it's all going to be shown, as well as a live stream on our SABC website. So we really are ensuring that everybody gets access to this lecture. Now, former President Nelson Mandela provides the world a lesson in leadership, not merely from a national perspective, but an international one. That is the view of the former Assistant Secretary-General for Public Information at the United Nations, who held the post when Madiba visited the UN headquarters in New York for the first time as president in 1994. Samir Sanbar, a 33-year retired veteran of the organization, serving under 5 Secretary-Generals, also played an important role in directing the UN's communication strategies in the late 1980s towards the freeing of Madiba and the liberation of black South Africans.
At 82, Samir Sanbar has a few stories to tell, but none get him more animated than when he recalls his days as the UN's Director of Communications and Information Centers around the world.
I grew up from the ranks, and I became, at the time, I was head of the communications centers, the information centers around the world. And we thought, well, maybe we should try to highlight that issue and see how best we can do it. Because, quite frankly, I felt that some of these internal meetings, which were being held, committees and commissions within the UN, started becoming, in a way, counterproductive, like meeting to decide on the next meeting and the following meeting. And communique, press release, we got a singer to sing, Free Nelson Mandela. These little things were okay. But maybe we could be of more practical help, if possible.
As he recalls the story, he reached out to a South African contact working for an NGO in New York in the mid to late 1980s, who had a back channel to the ANC, wanting to find out how the UN could do more from a strategic communications perspective.
So I mentioned to him, now could you find out how best we can be of help? And after about 3-4 weeks, I got back the answer that from Madiba was in prison at the time, in jail, that we are very much happy that we are supported by our friends in South Africa, Africa, Asia, Latin America. That's helped us a great deal. But where you as the UN could help us, because you are based in New York, you are around the world, is if you can penetrate the media in countries which are not with us, which are supportive of the South African apartheid regime. For example, the US, where Mandela was considered a terrorist, UK, France. So if you can help in that area, that will be where you really can make a practical difference for us.
So they focused on the media in strategic countries, asking certain media to raise questions about freeing Nelson Mandela, an approach he defines as, don't just say something, do something.
At that particular time, a BBC correspondent came to me for asking for a particular support on something. And I said, oh, by the way, maybe you can raise this question of freeing Nelson Mandela. It's becoming an important issue, pressing issue, and so forth. So he said, okay, we'll do it. So we had a story on the BBC about freeing Nelson Mandela. After about 3-4 weeks, I got the same fellow coming back to me saying from Madiba, I heard you through BBC.
The UN produced this book in 1994, The United Nations and Apartheid, 1948 to 1994, about the role the organization played in the struggle in focusing worldwide attention on the country at that time. A copy which was presented to Madiba by then Secretary-General Boutros Ghali and Samir Sanbar, seen in this picture. So take me back. 1994, Nelson Mandela comes to the United Nations. He's just been elected President of the Republic of South Africa, and he asks to see you. Take me back to that moment.
When President Mandela was here, and he got the book, and there was the usual luncheon for heads of state, which was given, and I was a guest anyway because I headed the department. He kindly and thoughtfully left my hand. He said, he was used to say an expression usually. He would say, first class, first class. When he wants to, thank you for something and appreciate it, he would say, first class, meaning he approves.
I asked him about the joy he displays when he talks about that memory, a period he views as an example of the UN's relevance in the world at that time.
I get very emotional on this. I almost cried, because this is something for years we worked for. And I didn't join the UN to have a job, because I believed in the UN objectives and principles. And I said, those of us who thought the UN is there to raise issues and defend people, and maybe because I had worked in the field, in many field areas, with people I saw myself, people, and the way they really are trying to defend their human dignity. And I really very much was in line with human dignity. And I felt that this represents a certain moment where, despite all our frustrations and sometimes non-accomplishments, that this is something where really the UN could play a real positive role. And it helped in a way. It helped to highlight the role of the UN, and at the same time, it defended a people's liberation and their human dignity.
The theme of this year's centenary for Nelson Mandela, his 100 years, is Be the Legacy. What do you think Nelson Mandela's legacy and his example should be to leadership today?
A lesson of leadership, not just a country leadership, a national leadership, but a national leadership with an international credentials. Teaches the rest of the world. I'm not a South African, but I was inspired by Mandela. All of us were inspired by Mandela, because he was not just an example of how somebody would resist prison and endure a really difficult time to reach his objectives, but he really gave all of us a lesson of how we could really stay on the line. And also he opened his hand to his adversaries eventually. And despite all the difficulties he went through, great difficulties and pain, he opened his hand to others. And that was really very, very important for all of us.
Expressing hope for a world less fragmented, one in desperate need of more Mandelas.
Halos are out and selfies are in. Unfortunately.
Sherman Bryce-Pease, SABC News, New York.